This conference will now be recorded.
Great. So now we've been talking about a lot of concepts in web applications, and we've been talking about the Azure PaaS services as such, and we've been telling that how you can do networking with that, how you can basically make your web application private, how you can host multiple websites, how you can deploy code using something like a Visual Studio's 2019 server and all that stuff. But in reality, your web application is just not a very simple code. It has a lot of moving parts. Your web application might be trying to connect to, let's say, an Azure SQL Server, or let's say there is a storage account in place which your web application is used to store all it, it's using to store all its logs and all that stuff. So multiple things out here, and web application is really code intensive, meaning it can take very good amount of complex code and all that stuff, because if it doesn't, there isn't any difference between a web application and a storage account with a static website, right? So the main intention of a web application is not really to just display static code, but it is a dynamic code basically that keeps changing over a period of time. That is something that a web application really is meant to use for. And one of the use case scenarios is that how would your web application really, let's say, let me take this out, let's say connect to something like an Azure SQL Server, meaning you have a web application that is, let's say, running on an app service plan, and now your web application, let's say, is used to, let's say, display something. For example, in my case, for this particular demo, let's talk about different courses of Azure that is available, and let's say give some rating to that particular course. And whenever someone browses your web application, they need to see all that particular thing displayed over the internet. This is exactly what happens during, let's say, during, I mean, during the times when they publish the results and all for exams and all, right? You'll have your scorecard, you'll have different subjects, different marks and all that stuff. So something on those lines. So let's introduce something like a SQL Server out here. So an ideal diagram for a SQL Server. So even before we go into something like a SQL Server and all that stuff, I'll just talk a little bit about, let's say, the SQL servers that are available out there. Meaning, you can have a SQL Server installed on top of a virtual machine also. You can have a SQL Server workload, a SQL Server image installed on top of a virtual machine, and even that virtual machine can act as a SQL Server. Or if you want to manage the service, like for example, we can do the same thing. I mean, whatever we are doing with the web app, we can do the same thing with even, let's say, an IIS server, right? You can install I mean, you can take a virtual machine, you can install an IIS server on top of it, and you can consume it in the form of a web server. In the same way, even SQL servers basically come in two different formats, like one being an IaaS SQL server, meaning a SQL server workload running on top of, let's say, a virtual machine, or an Azure managed SQL server, which is an Azure PaaS service. It is completely managed by the platform. It's just given to you as a service as such, where Microsoft in the backend spins up a virtual machine, installs a couple of things out there, and does a lot of things out there and stuff, and gives you a SQL server, guys. Now, specific reason for a SQL server is I want to store structured data, I want to store complex data, and I also want to query my database. I also want to basically write a query into my database into a language called source query language, SQL. That's what SQL really stands for. Something known as a source query language, where I can really write my queries and extract the data from my my servers and my databases and etc. Using two terms here, one being a SQL server, the other being a SQL database. It's just like a relation between app service plan and the app service. The server provides a logical namespace, provides the infrastructure, everything, but the database that is inside it is something which holds your data. One server can have multiple databases, but databases cannot exist without a server. So how do I then create a SQL server using, let's say, the portal? So I'll just come down to my portal out here and I just say create a SQL server. So I'll just basically start with the creation of a SQL database. This will itself cover my SQL server also. So I'll say, okay, fine, I want to create a database and my subscription is a pay as you go. And I'll say it's a test DB 200 something like this, ABC, a unique name. Now it's asking me what kind of a server that you want. Now it's asking me what is the name of your server. I'll say, okay, fine, I want to create a new server. The name of the server again is like test server 200 ABC. Whatever the name of my database is, I'm giving the same existing name for my server. And test server 2ABC, I mean 200 ABC dot database dot windows dot net is the fully qualified domain name of my SQL server. What can I do with this? We'll talk about it. And since this is a server, right, you need a login and a password to someone to log into your server and do all that stuff. So I'll say it is a test user, the same login and password what we give to our virtual machines traditionally. Microsoft-001 and Microsoft-001. Let's select the region as ECS2 and I'll say okay. That's it. I'm just using something like this, a server, a database. Two things that I'm like right now creating, a SQL server and a database inside it. I can have multiple databases also inside the same SQL server. Now I'm saying, I mean, it's asking me, do you want something known as a SQL Elastic Pool? What SQL Elastic Pool? We will cover that, in a bit. But for now, I'm saying no, it's a single database that I want to create. It's now asking me what is the compute and the storage that you want. It's telling me, you know what, it's a general purpose file, 2 virtual cores, 32 GB of storage. Meaning it's talking about the infrastructure of the virtual machine that Azure will run in the backend. And you have a lot of things out here, like when you say configure database out here, you have a lot of things like general purpose, hyperscale, advanced, and all that stuff. But for my purpose, since I'm also using, let's say, something like a pay as you go, I'll say it's a basic. And it says, you know what, the DTUs that I offer, which is called data throughput unit. This is, let's say, the compute mechanism of SQL Server. It's telling, okay, fine, I will offer you something like 2 DTUs, like 2 data throughput units, and I'll offer you, let's say, something like a 5 GB maximum space. I say, okay, great. I can also, get it down to 1 data throughput unit out here, like any which ways, but I am like, being charged at this particular thing out here. So I'll say, okay, fine, this is a 2 GB size, it's good. And let's say this is the basic size that I can go for, which is going to cost me somewhere around 359 rupees per month. So for a month, if it's 359 rupees, it's for a 1 hour session, it's like even more less, right? So this is good. So basic size, I'll just apply this out. And guys, if you are especially using, let's say, a pay-as-you-go subscription, please select a basic size. SQL servers are very, very, very costly. SQL servers are very costly, so please make sure that you take a basic size out here. I'll say this is a local redundant storage. Like it's telling, okay, fine, I am offering you a storage. I'll also do a redundancy. I'll say, okay, fine, I don't want a geo redundant. I'm okay with a local redundant because it's just something, it's just a demo out here. And now it's asking me what is the connectivity option that you want to go for. How do you want to connect your SQL Server? For now, I'll just take it's a public, endpoint. Like anyone basically with an ID and a password can connect. And very importantly, I will allow the access to the Azure resources because at the end of the day, I want to make sure to connect my Azure web application to the SQL Server and to allow the traffic. I will say yes. And since I want to connect, I myself want to connect, I'll just whitelist my IP onto that particular SQL Server out here. So that's it. Like this is the only thing that I want to do. Security, additional settings, all these things, you don't even need to touch. I'll say review and create. So I'll say this is the estimated price, about 300, 59 rupees per a month. This is the estimated cost basically for the ECS to SQL Server and the database that you're giving. So this is a cost completely for the server, the database, storage, security, everything together is something that the price basically that they are kind of displaying out there. So fine, I said okay, fine. The SQL Server is getting deployed. So what all we did we do? We said we created a SQL Server out here and then a database inside it, and then I whitelisted my IP and I said allow the use of Azure resources, meaning allow Azure resources to use this particular SQL Server, meaning I want to now make sure that I connect a web app to this particular SQL Server, and the web app gets the data or fetches the data from this particular SQL Server out here. So I need to create a web app, right? So what I'll do is like I'll basically go to my portal back again, and once the SQL Server, this is going to take some time, like about 5 minutes or so. Like in my best experience, this is what I can say. So I'll go to the same resource group out here, and I'll say create a new resource, and that particular resource is an Azure web app. And now what I'll do is like I'll say this is a test web app to ABC 000, something like this. I'll say the runtime stack is a .NET Core. It's an East US 2. Like I prefer to basically put my resources in the same region. It can also be in a different region, not an issue. And the size is automatically standard out here, so I don't need a standard size for the demo. I'll just go for a free tier out here. So I'll say okay, fine, it's a free tier, which is okay, which is good. Apply it out. Deployment monitoring, just disable this out. For now we can disable, keep this disabled, and we can create a web application along with what, an app service plan, a web application that is running, let's say, on a .NET Core 3.1 long-term support. This is what it's trying to do right now. So it's just going ahead creating a web application, and it's also in the backend creating me something known as a SQL Server, like the databases and all that stuff. Now this is all it's getting created, so the firewall rules, everything gets configured, and it's also going ahead and creating my web application. Guys, any questions still here that I can take? Anything, guys? So now, very importantly, it's created me two different resources. Yeah, it's showing all these resources out here, but if you do a hard refresh of your browser, it's gonna show all the resources basically that are there in that particular resource group as such. So you also have a web app basically that got created. It's just taking a bit of time to show that out. But very importantly, you have a SQL Server, you have a SQL database. So let me go into the SQL Server, and this is how the blades of the SQL Server really look like. And if you go here into the SQL databases, you have one database which is basically running on a basic pricing tier, which is online. This is what I need. Now then, how do I connect to this particular database? Meaning right now this is an empty database. I want to put some data inside it, because at the end of the day I want to make sure that that particular data is basically streamed over the internet through a web app. Like whatever data I am like putting into this particular SQL Server out here, or this particular SQL database out here, the web app should be able to go ahead, pull this data, and give it to a user in the front. Let's imagine this user is, let's say, just looking into a website to see what are the courses and all that stuff. So user is querying this one out. User wants to see what is the data. The web app basically is going to the SQL Server, going into the database, and giving the result back out. Like this is what I want to really achieve out. For this, I need to have some kind of an existing data out here, right? And data in the SQL Server is stored in the form of tables. This is very, very important. It's a tabular format. It's a structured data basically that I'm kind of storing out. Then in order to firstly store my data, how do I basically even connect to the SQL Server? That's a question basically. Is that I can have two different methods. One which is a very basic, very easy. but it's like very limited in nature. I can go into my SQL database. This is how my SQL database really looks like. So it's a SQL database out here. I can go into something known as query editor. I can log into my SQL database from here. Earlier you did not have this option at all. Like this is like a new embedded feature, basically what Microsoft is like offering you. And here you have different things like tables, views, stored procedures, and etc. What I'm interested today is tables. Like I don't have a table, so I'll need to write a query to create a table. So everything that you do with SQL is in the form of a query. You can write a query here. Now if I want to look something into this particular database, I need to write a select query. If I need to insert something into it, I need to write an insert query. If I want to delete something, I would basically write a delete query. Now this is one way of connecting to your database, like directly from the portal. But let's say if you basically don't want this very simplified view, you want to do, you want to make the best out of your SQL Server. You have a tool called SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. You can just download it here, just a simple installation, and you can install this out on your local machine. So you can go via the portal, either go to the portal and try doing it out, or you can do, or you can download this particular tool called SSMS and connect to your SQL Server as such. So do I have the SSMS? Firstly, let me see. So I have a SQL Server Management Studio 18 basically that is installed on my laptop. Like I just installed it a couple of days ago. And big software, yes, it's a big software because it offers a lot of capabilities, especially for when you're coming from a developing background and all that stuff. So how do I connect to it then? I need to go into my SQL Server and I need to get the fully qualified domain name of the SQL Server firstly. It's something like test2abc something 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 dot database dot windows dot net. This is something that I basically want to connect to. So where's my SSMS? Let's see. I don't think it got opened. Yeah, still loading. This will take a little time basically to load. And now it's telling me, now when you connect to it, like you'll just have this particular page. You can just click on this option called connect and you can say database engine. And here I'll just edit the name out here and give a, oh, this is an IP then got copied. Fine. I'll just go back into my SQL Server, take this out, go to my SSMS, place it out here. And I'll say this is like you have a lot of options out here. I'll say SQL Server authentication because I have my ID and password and I can also connect to my SQL Server this way. So I am authenticated in that way and I now have my SQL basically server out here. And if you have multiple databases, you can see all that multiple databases out here. In my case, I only have one database out here. And this database doesn't have any tables, nothing. It doesn't really have anything out. So I would like to right now go ahead and create tables. I would like to go ahead and insert data into my and all that stuff. So what I want to do is like I want to write a query. How do I write a query? Come here to the database and say a new query. Like do a right click and it'll take some time. Say new query and it will basically give you a query editor. Like this is the query editor where you can go ahead and write a lot of queries and etc. Now I've already written a couple of queries out here. So I already basically have a couple of commands out here. The very first command is to create a table. How do I create a table firstly? Is by using this particular command. So I am telling create a table called course and I am giving a couple of parameters like course ID, course name and rating, like a couple of things out here. And I'm just selecting all these things or I can just say execute. And now if you refresh your SQL server out here, you'll be able to see a table with the name called course. This is the table that should appear if this particular basically command has successfully got executed. This is the table what I'm really looking at. It's called dbo.course database object which is called a course. Now I want to insert something into this particular database. I want to insert data into this particular database. So these are the commands basically that I want to use. So I am saying insert into course, meaning insert into this particular table out here. And basically the course ID, course rating basically is something like this. So just go ahead and insert this out, and this is how I'll basically try executing it out. So it is inserting something like the values, like the name, this is the course ID 1, course name is AC204, something like this, rating is 4.5. Insert into course ID is 2, course name is AC303, something like this, and insert something. So I'm just inserting everything out here. And once this is done, I can go ahead, erase this out, and I can basically refresh this particular console, like refresh my SQL Server console out here. And if I now want to see what data that I do have out here, I can run something known as a select query out here on my particular SQL Server. So what I'll do here is that I just want to see what data that I really put into my table. So I'll say select star, meaning select everything from dbo.course, and then run this out. And this is the data what I have here. It's like it's telling me, what, this is what it is and this is how it is, and can you insert more? Yes, I can. Can you delete? Yes, I can. I can do whatever I need basically from this. So this is the query what I run, and this is the data, or this is how I insert my data. Now you can do the same thing using the inline editor also. You can come into the SQL databases, go into this particular SQL database and do a query editor out here. And since this is a simple query, you can just give your password and just run your queries out there. Meaning if I even do the same thing out here, I'll be able to see all my data. So I'll see basically my tables, DBO course. I'll basically see all the entries out here. So I can also do a select statement basically out here, execute a select statement out here. And be able to see the data out here. So this is the capability what the inline editor also gives you kind of. So this is how you basically create a SQL Server, interact with it and all that stuff. Now if you basically have the privileges on your machine and space on your machine, you can go ahead and install an SSMS. Or if you don't want it, you can just directly go ahead and let's say use the inline editor out here. Now what I want to do is like I now want to basically, my SQL Server is ready, my web app is also ready. Now my web app basically should now communicate with my SQL Server. My web app basically should now basically go ahead and let's say communicate with my SQL Server, for which I need a working code. Now this is done by a working code. Now this is your infrastructure work. This is done. Like whatever you need, you put everything on there. Now what I want to do is like I want to go ahead basically. I have a SQL project basically that is created. How is it created again? This is like not really a concern for this particular course, guys. This is something that a developer will will already probably have and get created. So that is something that we do not want to really look into. But for now I have a code which can which basically can go into a SQL Server and basically run a select statement, because at the end of the day that's what I want to do. I want to do a select statement and I want to display whatever is there in my database on top of the internet, or basically stream it over the internet. This is what I want to really do out here. And this is how the code really looks like. So it's a SQL app project and all that stuff. And it's a very simple code, which basically if you look into, this is called a controller. Now if you look into it, it's looking for a SQL connection and it's doing something like select course ID from course. That's it. It's just executing a select statement. That's it. All it's doing is this, and it's relying upon something known as an app setting.json file, which is the configuration file of this entire thing. And it's looking for a connection string out here. Meaning, how do I connect to a SQL server, or how do I applications connect to my SQL server, is by using something known as a connection string. Where do I get it? If you go inside the SQL database, you will have something known as show database connection strings. This is what your connection string really looks like. So connection strings again used to connect to, let's say, different services like storage. In my case, this is SQL. So I have a connection string out here that I can use. So I'll just copy my connection string, paste my connection string into one notepad, and just see how it looks like. So it says server TCP something something something. This is the name of the fully qualified domain name of the server, and this is the port number, which is 1433. SQL servers interact on a port called 1433. Saying initial catalog, meaning this is the database name, and now it's telling me the ID and the password. Here is where you'll need to enter your password. You need to basically go ahead and enter a password out here for your applications to go ahead and use this ID and password to connect to your SQL server. So this is how your applications really will look for something known as, let's say, a SQL connection, and this is how they'll try to establish a connection. And the connections, if any, should be declared in something known as an app-setting.json file. Right now, my app-setting.json file just has something like a logging information, logging level is something like this and stuff like that. This is like whenever you create a SQL, whenever you create a project, right, like an ASP.NET project, this is the boilerplate template what you have. So what I'm trying to do right now is that I'm not declaring anything in my app-setting.json file. I'm saying, okay, fine, this is not a problem. I will just do, okay, I'll just basically do just a second, I'll just do a publish, and I'll say basically create a new publishing profile, and I'll basically do Azure Web Windows, and now it already has my account, so it's searching for a web application basically inside my account. It has got a web application. I'll say finish, and just before I release the code, I just want to edit my configuration, and I'll say file publish options, remove additional files at destination. I'll say save. That's it. I'll just do this and I'll publish my code. So very simple. I'm just trying to, let's say, publish my code, and I'm just trying to do the same thing what we have done like earlier. Like that time we did a basic code. Now the code is a bit complex. It's going ahead and trying to, let's say, connect to a SQL server and all that stuff. So let's give it a minute, and let's allow the code to get built, and then get released on top of my web application. This will take about a minute or two to for the entire process to be done. And very importantly, please remember, I have not given a connection string out here. I have not mentioned any connection strings out here. I have not done anything as such. And now it's going ahead and publishing my code on top of my web application. So it's firstly building my code. The building is done, and after building it will go ahead and, let's say, publish my code on top of the application. So it's now going into the application and going into the root of the application and not basically adding all these stuff out. And then it's saying, you know what, I've published it, this is successful. I'll restart the application and give you the site. It's telling you, okay, fine, this is great, this is successful and all that stuff. And it said restarted the application, and now it's going ahead and it's trying to load the web application. And it's saying the web application did not, find and all that stuff because I have not passed in the necessary connection. This particular link, right? This is something that I haven't passed at all. Even in my code, I have just given a very bare basic log information out here. Now, very importantly, I need to establish this connection between these two guys, a web app and a SQL server. And I have the connection string with me. So I'll take my connection string. I'll go into my web app. I'll go into my web app, into my application, into something known as configuration, and I will add a connection string out here. I will say new connection string. I'll say the value of the connection string firstly, since I copied it, I'll just paste it out here. I'll say it's an Azure SQL Server, and I'll give the name of a connection string. Now this is looking for a specific name. This is important. This code, right? It's looking for a SQL connection called, it's looking for a connection string called SQL connection. This is how it is like, really kind of looking things for there. So I'll just take this name out here because I know that this code is basically working on this particular thing. I'll just take this name out here. I'll just paste this out here, which is called SQL connection. This is the name. This is the key value pair basically that I'm kind of declaring out here. And I'll just say save. And I'll just give a web application a restart. So I'm trying to establish this particular connection out here by using something known as an inbuilt feature called connection strings out there in my in my Azure web app. This is how I am going ahead and building things out. So after this is done, I'll just give my web application a restart. And now if I try to browse this out, let me give it like a minute. Now this is going to boot up and do a lot of process out there. And now it is able to go ahead and let's say display values like this. Meaning if I now change something on the backend, let's say if I do another insert statement out here, let's say the course name is something like, the course ID is something like 4, course name is something like AZ400. Come on, course name is something like AZ400, Azure DevOps. If I now execute this out, I have affected one more row out here. And if I now run my select query, I'll have 4 things out here. The same thing is going to get reflected on my data, on my front end application also. So every time I load my application out here, my application is going to do a query on my backend database. It's going to pull my data and it's going to display. This is how the architecture really works out here. So now we're making things a bit complicated to make sure that your web application is just not a standalone web application, but rather this is a web application that will go ahead and interact with a SQL database in the backend. This is the entire concept of this, guy. So any questions till now? Anything?
Yeah, these days database servers and database are geo-specific or region-specific.
These are, what do you mean by geospecific as such? Like meaning if you have a web application, let's say in India, are you asking that can it go and connect to these particular server?
Yeah, so my SQL Server and database is in different region, and my web app is in different region. So can connect together.
Yes, it can connect together. And until the point that you are giving a proper connection string, it will be able to go ahead and connect to it. So it just needs a connection string as such. That's it.
Okay.
But how do we create the code of SQL in Visual Studio then?
That's a very good question, for which I have created a GitHub page for you all. I just put in everything inside it, like everything basically that I use in this particular folder. This is basically the entire code. This is your solution file. This is the SQL commands. Everything together I zipped it out and I put it in a public GitHub repository. You all can download the entire thing. Now writing a code is not what we go for, guys. So writing a code is something that we can safely ignore. You can just go to this link, download all these things out, and open it up in, let's say, your Visual Studios, and you can start using this particular thing. So just like this, it's as simple as that. The only thing that you have to do when you're doing this particular demo, or the only thing that you have to mind while doing this particular demo, is when you go to the configuration, right, it's expecting for a value called SQL connection, because the code is written in that way. The code is written in something called, or the code basically is looking for a value called SQL connection. If you give a different name out here, right, your application will fail. So you'll have to give the same name that is there in the code, and make sure that you are giving a proper password and ID out here. When you pull your password and ID, or when you pull the connection string, it will not give you an ID and password. So you will have to manually write your ID and the password out here. ID will be there, but you'll have to manually write your password out here. So this is how you can do it, Akila. Is that okay?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, great. So any further questions with this, guys?
But it's little confusing.
It is, because there is code that is involved out here, right? Till now we've been talking about infrastructure, but especially when you talk about, let's say, a PaaS service, like let's say an Azure PaaS service, any PaaS service, right? It's highly code intensive. So code is the one which drives the entire infrastructure. So you need to have a bit of understanding about how the code really works out there. Like you don't need to really understand what are the classes, objects, and all that stuff. That's something that I don't expect you all to basically have an understanding about. But the only thing you need to understand is like, okay, fine, how is it like really working out here, and how is the infrastructure getting connected? Like how are we giving the connection strings, and how are we creating the SQL servers and all that stuff? The infra of it. I don't even expect you all to basically write SQL scripts. This is not our work. This is a SQL DBA. Like that's a role of a SQL database administrator or a developer who's like developing things out. Not our role. But good to have, like good to know. Like that, how do you write and how do you do a select statements and all that stuff? It's good to know. And I've also put this file also, so you can take this file and execute queries out there. And while executing it, just see what you're executing out. But the creation of infrastructure, provision of the infrastructure is what we come into picture. Like this is our major role out here. Like provision of infrastructure, creation of all these things, this is where we guys really come into picture. So that is where the question now is that, can we automate it? Can we automate the creation of all these things using an ARM template? Certainly yes. You can definitely use an ARM template in order to go ahead and create all the stuff. So before creating it, let me delete this out and let me create a complete package again. Like both the resource groups, the resource group, the SQL servers inside it, the web apps, along with the connection strings also. Now this time around, I will not use Visual Studio Code, because Visual Studio Code is something that we be using, we know how to use it and all that stuff. Can I create an ARM template using the Visual Studio as such? Definitely yes. If you have a Visual Studio, you can go ahead and create it, and probably one of the most easiest ways to create it. How do I create it? File, new, and then sorry, this is like a bit tricky, so come on. File, new, and then project. And now I am not going to select a ASP.NET template. Rather, I am doing something known as an Azure resource group. As in when you type in an Azure resource group, right, you'll get this particular template, meaning this is your ARM templates. This one, anything works fine. So here I have an, basically I've been using this out. So I have this one out. Now it's asking me what is the name of your project that you want to create. I'll say it's a SQL project that I want to create, or SQL project web app that I want to create, and I'll say create. So instead of selecting an ASP.NET, I am now selecting an ARM template, and now it's asking me, what do you want to create? What do you want to exactly do? Let's start with a blank template. Now this will give you a complete package. Like it will give you the main template file, give you the parameter template file. It will have everything in place out here. So it says, what is the main template? This is your parameter template. Now how do I then add resources to it? How do I basically create something to it? Now this is your JSON outline, what you see in your Visual Studio Code also. Here I'll go into the resources. I'll say add a new resource. And it will load from a set of resources out here. Let me see if I have a web app plus a SQL basically that I can do. Okay, this is a web app. I have a SQL server. I have a SQL database and all that stuff. Okay, so I do not have a web app plus a SQL basically inbuilt into it. So I'll have to write something. But in the best interest of time, I'll just do cancel of it. I'll just start again from scratch. I'll say project. I'll say resource group. I'll say SQL app web. I'll just create a new template out here again. And now you can directly fetch templates from the GitHub, or you can start with the templates that are inbuilt in Visual Studios. This is the advantage when you come up with, let's say, a tool called Visual Studio Server, because this has a lot of things and all that stuff. And yes, this sometimes gives you a bit of trouble and all. So cancel, let's say create. Already exists. Okay, fine. SQL application. And now I'll select a template called web app plus SQL. This is a template that is inbuilt onto the Visual Studio. Visual Studio already also has this template out there. So you don't really need to write anything as such. You need to just change what is existing out there. So I have all my resources getting created out here with variables, with everything got created. I don't even have to do anything. I also have something like an app, auto scale component, app setting component and all, which I don't need at all. So I'll just delete what I don't need. And now if you look at the resources, right, especially when I focus on the resources section out here, I have a SQL server that got created, which is my entire server. I got a SQL database which is there along with the sizes, and I also basically have a couple of IP rules basically that I'm allowing, meaning I'm basically doing a public doing a public access out here. I have a hosting plan, which is app service plan out here. I have a website basically, which is my Azure website, and I have the names for all these things basically. And the names is something like concat website with unique string and all that stuff, meaning it'll just create a unique name every time basically that you deploy this out. So this is as simple as it is. So I'm just doing a basic object out here, like a basic SQL object out here with some amount of size out here. And I am basically giving everything as, let's say, as let's say a variables, as let's say parameters and all that stuff. So I just didn't do anything. I just basically created a very basic, basic template out of, let's say, the existing ones. I can also go ahead and edit this out, in however way I want it to. But right now what I'll do is like I'll just take the boilerplate template and I'll just want to deploy this out. How do I do it? Just say deploy. When click on this particular icon out here, deploy, new, and let me change the account. Now it's going to identify that yes, you basically have an account, an existing account, but you do not have a resource group. So I'll say create a new resource group. That is not a problem. I'll just say ECS2 is the location, and this is the name of the resource group, which is okay. I'll say create. You can also basically send out resource group creation calls from this particular portal out here. And you have two different templates out here, guys. One being website something, the other being website database something like this. Now if you edit the parameters, you have a couple of parameters that you need to pass. Firstly, your app service plan name. I'll say it is ASP plan name 200, something like this. Capacity is 1 and all that stuff. Now, administrator login. This is for your SQL Server. I'll say test user, and this is the name of my SQL Server. Sorry, name of the SQL database. I will say this is a test db2xyz000, a unique name basically that I want, and this is a login password. Now, if I do a login password, right, it is now coming as a secret value out here. So I'll say now you can also save this password as a plain text in your parameter file, but I don't want to do that in that way. Or you can also do it in this way. I'll say save, and as when I save it, right, all the parameters got saved out here. Whatever I entered got saved, and this is the administrator password. Now, the main intention of me showing this template is not to basically show how do you create a SQL server and all that stuff. That is basically self-explained in this template. And if you go into this particular template out here, you go into the resources section, you'll be basically finding all these things out. But the main thing that I want to basically enforce out here is something known as security. Now, I am not creating my resources in a secured way. The reason being, I am not supposed to expose my passwords like this. As a DevOps engineer, the other area that I'll also be looking into is security of the infrastructure that I'm trying to create. Because let's say if tomorrow if this particular template is being used by someone, this can also be misused. Because this is a SQL server that I'm talking about now. SQL server also has, I mean, you have like very critical information inside your SQL server, client information, all that stuff. You'll basically have all those things inside your client. Inside your SQL server out here. Now, what I want to do is, yes, I want to establish a connection. I want to do all that stuff, but I want to force my application not to use a password directly like this in the template. I want to make sure that my password is coming out from a secured location. My password is rather coming out from a secured location, and Azure provides you something known as a key vault. Another service, another platform as a service, managed service with Azure, which will help you store passwords, secrets, keys, certificates, all that stuff. I want to leverage this service called as an Azure Key Vault while creating my infrastructure, and I want my ARM templates to refer to my Key Vault and then connect to the database. Then kind of establish this particular connection, for which I need to have a Key Vault resource that is there on the portal, which I don't have right now. So what am I going to do is like I'll say okay fine in the same I'll just basically refresh this out. I'll have a resource group basically that got created because I basically created a resource group from this particular template out here. I'll say okay fine, create a new resource. The name of the resource is an Azure Key Vault. I'll say create, and I'll basically give the name of a Key Vault like test to abc 000kv for my Key Vault convention. Same region like ECS2. SKU is standard, which is good enough. Retention, I basically it's like if your Key Vault is deleted, how many days you want to retain your Key Vault. It's like 90. I'll just say 7. Like I'll say okay fine, this is 7, not a problem. Access policy, who can access it, how can they access it. Now I am logged in with an account like something like this, so that's the reason you find an account like this, and you can set permissions on how can they access it, what can they access it, and all that stuff. And I will very importantly enable these options called Azure Resource Manager template for deployment, meaning allow my Azure Resource Manager templates, which is ARM template, to use this particular Key Vault. Networking, as of now, nothing. I won't enforce networking right now. Review and create. So I am creating an entity called as an Azure Key Vault. I am saying who can access that particular key vault. I'm giving a name of a key vault, and I'm saying also very importantly that my resource manager templates should also be able to access the key vault. This is the only thing I'm talking about. I'm talking about this and I'm saying, okay, fine, go ahead and create a key vault out there. So again, what is the purpose of a key vault? Sensitive informations like passwords, keys, certificates, client IDs, client secrets, all these things are something which is very sensitive. These are something that I don't want to expose to my end user. These are something that I should never expose to anyone out there. So I want my templates to fetch, or I rather want my templates to fetch it from the Azure Key Vault and then start creating something out there. And then basically start creating something out there. This is what I'm doing right now. So I'm just creating a resource like Azure Key Vault, which will take like about 2 or 3 minutes. Once this is created, I will create a secret called as a SQL administrator password, because that is what I want for this particular template, because this is looking for an administrator password. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, fine, go to your resource, which is a key vault. This is how it looks like. Here, very importantly, I'll go into something known as secrets. I'll say there are no secrets right now. It's telling me that there are no secrets as such. It's searching for a secret, and it will say what, you do not have a secret and all that stuff. Once that's done, I can go ahead and let's say create a new secret as such. It says there are no secrets available right now. I'll say generate or import a secret. Name of the secret is SQL administrator password, SQL admin password. Secret name is something like Microsoft -001. So your secrets are also encrypted. All your secrets are kind of encrypted. You won't be able to see them. I'll say create. I'll now basically go ahead and say create this out. So I have a password now got created, which is called SQL administrator password. And since I am an administrator, since I have the access to look at it, I can go into the password and I can basically look into what is the secret value of it. This is how the secret value really looks like. Fine, great. I have created it. How do I use it? How do I consume all these secrets? Now again, I'll go into my ARM template. I'll say deploy. I'll say new deployment. I'll change my account. I'll basically take this particular resource group out here. Now edit my parameters. Now I don't want my passwords to come like this. Rather, there's an option called save this in a key vault. It will now look for something like a password out here. And since I have only one password, it's showing me, and since I have only one key vault, it's showing me one key vault. I'll select OK. I'll select save. Now if you look at this thing, guys, the administrator password, right? The entire block became like this. Now what my ARM template is doing? My ARM template is rather referencing to a resource ID, which is an ID of the Azure Key Vault. It's saying, okay, fine, you go into this particular subscription, into this particular resource group, which is called SQL application something, providers is something, Microsoft.Key Vault. And go into this particular key vault and pull a secret with a value called SQL administrator password. And this is how I can now deploy my resources securely. How do I deploy it? Just saying new. Now I'm all good. I can just do a deployment. That's it. I can hit a deploy and all my resources will start getting created. The main thing out here is that the creation of resource is not straightforward. It is rather now using something known as a key vault. It is leveraging a resource called as a key vault. It's going inside that particular key vault and pulling a secret out there. Now if you all want this template also, I'll go ahead and let's say put this template as such on the GitHub repository, but this is like easy to create if you are coming from, let's say, something like a Visual Studio. And even if you basically, create using a Visual Studio code, you just need to basically mention all these things out manually. But if you just want to, use a basic template, just say file, new project, Azure Resource Group is the name of the project. The template is a web app plus a SQL. This is how you can select an existing template and kind of create all these resources out here. I understand this is like a bit tricky. It'll take some time for you all to digest this out, you all to consume this out. But this is primarily going to be our work. Securing all these things out, calling, referencing your key vault, making sure that the key vault is basically leveraged in your service or leveraged in your templates. All these things are primarily our duty. Guys, any questions?
Can we use all the ARM templates by using this Visual Studio?
Yes, you can. You can. I mean, this looks easy to use when you, especially when you're starting with ARM templates. You can just take out boilerplate templates and then kind of edit them out. You can do it. There is no restriction. The only thing I basically did not in the first place encourage you all to download this is because it's a big software, and it's like around 12 GB or something basically if you want to install the complete version of it. So that's the reason I did not basically go ahead and explain this out in the first place. But when things get a bit complicated, it will also take some time for me to write the template and reference my keyword out there, and I'll end up confusing a lot of people. So I didn't want to do that. That's the reason I just took a boilerplate template. I just took a sample template that was available out there, didn't do anything with the template, but just modified a little bit and made sure that I call up something known as an Azure Key Vault out here. So yes, you can create any resource with Visual Studio also.
Because it's easy to use. It looks very
It
impressive.
is. Yeah, it is easy to use, and there are a lot of pre-existing templates that you can really call directly and then edit things out. It is definitely easy to use, and the reason I don't use it is because Visual Studio Code is something that I'm really used to, and that is like a lightweighted software. So I kind of edit. I can do a lot of editing since I have an idea on how to write this out. So I basically with ease I just write this out. But for someone who's starting up, I definitely understand. You will need some time in order to get used to like the ARM templates, syntaxing of all that stuff. So it's easy to start with this. Any further questions, guys? Anything else, guys? Anything else that I can take for today? Now, please make sure to use this particular GitHub link to basically get the SQL code. And if you all want even the template, I'll go ahead and put this template also. But this is like pretty straightforward. You'll have to. I mean, this is easy to just go ahead and use a Visual Studio and create it out. And it's like easy to use. Like you have a GUI console basically that will help you edit and all that stuff. But this is whole and all. These are the number of actors basically, or these are the number of players you will basically interact with on a daily basis. Like just not a web app with a SQL Server, or a web app basically trying to connect to, let's say, an Azure storage account and giving you an error, telling that what I'm getting an error. The developers will come to you and say, what, I'm getting this particular error out there, or I'm getting such a kind of an error out there. Can you please help me out? This is something that we'll have to troubleshoot it at an infrastructure level at a regular interval of time. So if you have a knowledge of this particular thing, if you basically have a knowledge on how this thing works and how all the stuff works, it'll be easy for you to just go ahead and just perform directly. So ARM is something which is again and again, which I'll overstress it, which is again will be your bread and butter. This is something which is used again and again. ARM, Terraform, or PowerShell scripting. And these are like various techniques basically you can use it to create your ARM templates using Visual Studio or using Visual Studio Code or any other editor basically that supports the ARM language. This is all what you can do, guys.
In
And
that
key
link we
one,
have
yeah, sorry.
in that link we have two files, right? So I should download both of them.
Just a second. Okay, you're talking about this file also, readme?
Yeah.
No, this is just a basically a simple file basically that you get when you create a repository. You don't have to download that. You just have to download the zip file basically that I've given and unzip it out.
Okay.
Once you unzip out, you'll have all those folders and everything. You can start using them. You can just click on download and you can just start using them out. So that readme file is something that you can ignore. That is something that is safe to ignore as such. So whenever we discuss templates, whenever we discuss something, I'll just put it in and upload it inside this particular repository so that you can start pulling on downloading stuff from this. So any questions, guys? Anything basically that you have a question on that needs to get clarified? Anything? Now from tomorrow is when we'll start going ahead and looking at Azure DevOps, and Azure DevOps would be like really very very interesting. And for y'all to understand Azure DevOps, you need to have a knowledge of Azure, because DevOps is nothing but a practice over a cloud. So that's the reason we've been looking at Azure since the last 1 month. And this makes things much easier for you to understand what DevOps really is. Now we've been doing everything manually. Like we are taking that code and deploying it manually from our local machine. We are deploying ARM templates from our local machine and all that stuff. That is something that we don't want to do anymore. Now we want to use, or we want to leverage, something known as an Azure DevOps service in order to go ahead and make all our DevOps practices. So from tomorrow we will be starting with Azure DevOps. The first thing that I'll be starting with is let's have a very basic introduction of what Azure DevOps is, what the team structure would be, how would your roles would be, and all that stuff. And then we will be starting off with something known as an Azure repo or a Git repo, also known as like a Git repository. We'll be looking at Azure boards, pipelines, CI, CD, policies, and all that stuff. All these things would together encompass your Azure DevOps as such. So Azure is a different thing, guys. Azure is a cloud. Now, Azure in itself is a software as a service. Like you have a URL out here, you can just consume that URL. That's it. You can just click on portal.azure.com and you'll be diverted to this. You do not have to install anything for Azure. In the same way, DevOps is also a software as a service. How do you go to DevOps? It's called dev.azure.com, which will give you a service called as an Azure DevOps. Like this is the entire Azure DevOps service, and we will start to deal with this service and such. Now this is a separate service again, separate from Azure, but for implementing DevOps, you need a cloud. You need a cloud, you need basically an on-premises infrastructure, whatever it is that you're practicing on. You need a cloud at least. Like you need an infrastructure where you can do all your DevOps practices. So we will see how this works. We will see basically in detail on what Azure DevOps is and what all that stuff is, and we'll discuss in a great detail on how we can do all that, all the Azure DevOps and etc. And this will take somewhere around at least 7 to 10 classes. That's like the minimum what I'm talking about. At least 7 to 10 to cover the entire DevOps, because on the whole you have repositories, you have CI/CD pipelines and all that stuff basically that you will be dealing with on a daily basis. So we will look into it in great detail, and we will do a couple of projects also using Azure DevOps. So that's it from my end, guys, from today. So if you have any questions, you can ask, or If there are no questions that I can take, we can call it a day. Okay, so have a great day ahead, guys. We will meet tomorrow at the same time, and please make sure to attend tomorrow's class for sure, because that's going to be an Azure DevOps introduction. It's really going to help, for the entire course curriculum further. Thank you, guys.